May the words of my mouth and the meditation of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. In the English language, we have one word for love. We use love to mean a variety of emotions and experiences, from a general sense of enjoyment, I love my morning coffee, to something as profound as a love a parent has for their child, or the love between two people who choose to spend their lives together. We know what we mean when we say love by the context of the sentence. We might tell a friend that we love them, which is different than if we proclaimed our love for baseball. Most of the time, I believe we associate love with a good feeling, an affection for someone or something else. When it comes to family, though, love means something a little different. We may not always feel positive affection for a family member, but that does not mean we don't love them. The love we have becomes a bit harder to define. It's a commitment to a relationship and a response to a relationship that transcends day-to-day emotions of affection and enjoyment. In Greek, the language of the New Testament, there are 4 words for love, and 3 of the 4 appear in the Bible. There's eros, which is what we would call romantic love. There is philia, brotherly love, and agape, which is a little more difficult to define, but generally is understood as unconditional love. Of these 3 loves, agape is the most common and the one Jesus uses the most often. It is the type of love that he uses in today's gospel when he is questioned about the greatest commandment. His answer, love God with everything in you and love your neighbor as yourself. There is something lost here in the translation. When we hear love spoken in English, it gets reduced to this idea of positive affection, a feeling of kind regard for God. We may also feel a sense of commitment to God out of love and the love God has for us, but the full impact of agape that Jesus speaks of is missing. Agape can be a verb and is used as a verb today. The gospel says we must agapesis God and agapesis our neighbor, which literally translated means you shall be loving God and you shall be loving your neighbor. It's an active expression, not a passive feeling. It's an active love, and one that mirrors the active love of God. God actively chose Israel. God has actively revealed God's love for us by becoming human in Jesus, who then actively demonstrated God's love through works of mercy and justice, compassion and healing. Jesus spoke up for the poor, the widow, the orphan, 3 very vulnerable groups in Israel. He healed the sick. He challenged those places in Israel where love had been exchanged for injustice and power. What we know about God's love from the love of Jesus is that it is unconditional. It is just and merciful, compassionate and healing, freeing and compelling. It is alive and life-giving, and it is indiscriminate. There is no one excluded from this love. The greatest commandment, then, is not about a general feeling of positive affection for God. It is about choosing God as God chose us. Agapesis is to give one's life to God for God's glory, and not in the sense of self-denial, but with the knowledge that giving our lives to love will fill our lives with such blessing and grace and mercy and joy and holiness that nothing can really compare. This love for our neighbor is the same. It is not about having a positive affection for everyone. That would be impossible. To love our neighbor is to seek in the other the holy in them, the part of them that bears the image of God. To love our neighbor is to make a commitment to loving kindness and merciful action in a way that is generous and consistent. A week from today is Consecration Sunday, the day that we make a financial pledge to the mission and ministry of this church and enjoy a lunch together in celebration of this commitment. There is a practical aspect to your financial giving. We are all responsible for making sure the lights are on and the building is cared for, that the programs we have here run well, and that the needs of the members of this church are met. We all take part in the life of the community this way. But giving to the church is first and foremost about making a commitment to that agapesis relationship with God, to be loving God. The word consecration means to make holy. And we call this Sunday Consecration Sunday because we ask God to make holy the gift of our lives to God, including our financial giving. We have heard several stories in the past weeks about what giving to the church has meant in the lives of parishioners here. I want you to know that financial giving is also something I do. For clergy who earn their living by serving church communities like myself, giving is expected. It's part of our education and formation to understand how important it is to give. If it was simply about the money, we could just have it deducted from our monthly paycheck, right? But it's not about the money. It's really about the commitment. So each month, the first check that I write is a check to this church. 10% of what I earn, I give back to this church. Not because I feel an obligation, but because I feel a call to make a commitment of my life to God in all ways, including giving financially. It is the act of giving that is life-giving, not the money given. This past week, Epiphany lost a much-loved member of our community, Wilbur Skeels, who was a 10 o'clocker and sang with our Scola. He was a musician and a retired Baptist pastor who served in pastoral ministry for about 40 years. He had been suffering from cancer and passed away peacefully. In his last days, I was privileged to spend time with him and his family, and one of his sons and I had a conversation about how important the giving of our whole selves to God was to Wilbur. He told me his dad had said, "The God who loves us and that we serve is so great. How can we not give our best back to God?" This is the agapesis, this action of loving God that Jesus speaks of, to choose God as God chose us, and live out that commitment to God by being loving of God with all that we have and in all ways. With a God as great as ours, how could we do any less?